Hi, this is Greg Schuler, and this video is a demo of a new feature in Rundeck 2.5. It's a command line tool called rd-acl, and it's designed to help you validate, test, and generate the access control policy files for Rundeck. So this tool, rd-acl, has three subcommands: test, create, and list. Test allows you to validate whether your ACL policies would allow a certain action for a certain resource and for a certain group or username. The create command lets you generate access control policy files in the correct YAML syntax, and then the list command lets you get an overview of all of the access granted to a particular user or group. The test and list commands can use a directory as an argument to look at all the ACL policy files in a specific directory. You can also use the file argument to pick just a single file. But if you don't use either of those, then it will use the configured etcdir for Rundeck in your Rundeck installation. Now, the rd-acl tool doesn't need access to the Rundeck server. It doesn't use the API or anything. It's pretty standalone. It just looks at the files, so you could use this offline if you need to. The -v verbose option will give you more output for all these commands. So let's first talk about the list command. If I use the list command, it's going to prompt me to specify a group or user. I'm going to use a group called admin, which is one of the default groups. And with just no options, it can only test a few things. And it tells me with these parenthetical statements that if you add more arguments, it will give you more information. So what it can test without those arguments is a few things. And it shows the evaluation of the test on a single line. The first column indicates whether the action was allowed or not. The plus sign means it was allowed, and then a minus sign means it wasn't allowed. The second word is the action that was tested, and then finally the resource that was tested. So you can see there's four actions allowed at just the basic level. If I use a P option, I can provide a project name, and this will give me more information. Under the application context access, you can see it. The admin group has access to all these actions on a project with that name. Within the context of that project, these particular actions are allowed. Now, within the project, if I specified a job name, say test example, then you'll see more actions that are tested for a specific job. Similarly for nodes, if I specified a node, then it will give me some more information about access to the node. There's also the storage path, which is the Rundeck key storage system. So you can test the access at that level as well. So the list command gives you a broad overview of what access is granted to a particular group or user, and then allows you to add a little more detail to test certain things. The test command is pretty similar, but it's really designed to just narrow down to a specific access level for a particular resource. You're prompted at each level about the next bit of information that you need to enter. So the first thing to enter is the context. If I choose application, it will then prompt me for the group to test, so I'll use the admin group. And then to define what resource we're testing, there's a couple different arguments you could use. You can specify a project, the storage path. You could use the -r to specify the resource type directly, and then use -- attributes to provide key value pairs as to what attributes on that resource to test. And then finally, for generic resource kinds, you can also use the -- generic flag. So right now I'll just use a project test, And then we'll also prompt you for the action to test, and it will list all the actions available for that kind of resource. I can do more than one action if I want to test more than one, so I can just use commas. And then the test command exits with an exit code of 0 when it is successful, and it tells you what the result was. The create command is pretty much the exact same set of arguments, but if you use create instead of test, it will generate for you the access control policy in YAML syntax that you would need to grant that access level. If you, instead of use A for allow, if you use capital D for deny, then you can generate the deny equivalent. And so you can use the test and create to validate whether access is granted to a particular user on a resource, and then if it is not granted, you can switch to the create command to generate the access control that you need. The other thing that the create command can do is use as input the output that you get from the Rundeck audit log. So the audit log is a log file that records all of the access control requests that come into Rundeck. It has a lot of output. It's kind of confusing if you don't know what you're looking at. But you can see that there's a bunch of granted results. If I look for a rejected, I can see certain things were rejected for some access request. I can basically just take one of these lines or all of these lines and copy and paste them into the create command. So I'll use the pp paste macOS 10 tool, and I'll pipe it to the create command. I'll use the -i for input, and then the dash character is just standard input. You could use a file name here if you want to. And it's going to take what I copied, which was an access rejected result from the audit log, and generate the allow equivalent of that request. So this is pretty useful to debug access problems. If you can look in your audit log and find exactly where the access is being rejected from a request, you can just copy and paste that into the create command and get the access control that you need. One thing to be aware of though, when it does the generation of the ACL policy, it will look at the subject defined here. In this case, there's multiple groups for this user named ops, and so it's not going to generate the policy file for a particular group. It's going to be more specific and end up on the username. So if you are trying to make a policy for a group, you just want to make sure to change that to username. The other thing is that it's going to be very exacting about matching the resource that's being tested. So it's going to use equality matches for exactly what you pasted in. So if you're trying to match or allow access to like a set of jobs, you may want to change this to the match word, which would give you regular expression matching, or you may want to be less restrictive about your match. So that's the basics of how to use the rd-acl tool. In the next video, I will give a more full example on how to use these to build up your access control policy files. Thanks.